International Transport Forum. Transport for Society. Meeting people's needs. Making transport safer. Respecting the environment. Accessibility for all. Protecting and respecting people. New visions for transport. Connecting the world. International Transport Forum 2011. Transport for Society.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to International Transport Forum 2011, Day 2. You're very welcome. It's marvellous to see so many people here. Very pleased indeed to be able to welcome so many ministers. My name is Michael Portillo, or I'm also known as Michael Portillo, which may be appropriate as we meet under a Spanish presidency. I'm half British, half Spanish. I used to be a Minister of Transport. Those of you who are Ministers of Transport, you therefore have my deepest sympathy. I remember that when I was Minister of Transport, the extraordinary thing about it was that when people came to a meeting with me and they'd been delayed on the train or in the traffic, I had to apologise to them for their being late. So I understand your particular position. Today, we are talking about how we can meet people's needs in planning and policy, and we're going to do that in two parts. We're going to discuss moving people, and then we're going to discuss moving freight. We have two excellent panels. But a panel discussion is only successful if the audience participates as well, with questions and points. And after the panelists have spoken, I'd be particularly pleased if ministers who are represented here in the front rows would join in those discussions. That would make them particularly rich and memorable. That will come shortly. We have a few introductory speeches before we move on to those two panel groups. Right now, I would like to introduce a man that I've known for 23 years and worked with for 23 years. In other words, we were working together when we were kids. He is Jack Short. He is now your Secretary General. He's been Secretary General for a decade, and I'm sure you're going to give him a really warm round of applause and welcome him back to the stage. Jack.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to welcome everybody again for, I think, the third time perhaps, or the fourth time, but you still feel welcome. I'd like to welcome all our member countries, all 52 of you, I'd especially like to welcome our guests, our special guest, China. We're delighted that you are here. And of course, our sponsors, our partners and friends, our advisory board, the representatives of companies. We value the business inputs we get from you when we want to strengthen the links with you. We welcome the research community because we want to use your work to prepare better evidence-based policy. Spain, Minister Blanco, we want to thank you for your presidency, for leading us in this last year, you and all your team. Mr. Ramsar, we are so pleased with the support and strength of support from Germany. You and your state secretaries and all your staff give us great help, and thanks for everything. Yesterday, those of you who were here, we had, I think, a fantastically wide-ranging set of discussions on many issues, and you will find outside, because my staff have prepared them, a set of conclusions of the main issues that were raised, and I think you will find much to think about and talk about in those conclusions. So the sets of conclusions are already there for you to think about, and I hope we will build on them today. I'd like to take the opportunity while I have the floor to say a few more political kind of things about transport. And it takes up a little bit what Michael Portillo said at the start. It's about the political challenges of transport. And I want to mention three kinds of political challenges that I think there are. First is the dilemma. It's a common political dilemma, but the fact that transport infrastructure and services last for decades, and ministers' careers is rather short, maximum probably 4 years. I have kept a record, and on average, ministers' career is about 2 years. So since last year, we have had about 15 new ministers, and that's actually less than usual. So perhaps, ministers, your career opportunities are getting actually better. But still, it does mean that it's a short political career. A second political problem arises from the nature of transport itself. Transport demand is determined by millions of individual decisions about where to live, or work, or learn, or shop, or relax. And the trouble is that transport ministers and transport ministries have very little control over these variables. But just like you said, Mr. Portillo, they have to take the consequences when things go wrong. So if there's congestion, or if new infrastructure is needed, or there's poor services, the transport ministries and ministers get the blame. So that's another political challenge. And the third one I want to mention is public expectations. Transport is ubiquitous. Everyone travels and has views, and usually strong views, and indeed almost everyone is an expert on transport policy. And the expectations of the public, usually built on their best experiences, are high and are rising. So these three factors, short political time in office, limited influence on the variables, and a critical and demanding public, provide a very difficult background for transport ministers. It's obvious why it's much easier, for example, to be Minister of the Environment. And Minister Portillo, yes, we go back a long way, and we were children when you were a minister. You were one of the youngest ministers, I think, that ever chaired one of our meetings. But I remember you saying, you probably don't remember this yourself, that when you were a young, ambitious politician, that this was a ministry you had to get out of safely. It was a difficult political career. So transport ministers have a job of getting out of the ministry safely if they want to have an ambitious political career. And I think it's not the way it should be. So what should we do about this? Now, this is a political reality, and so let me give a few suggestions of things that might be done to deal with those three political problems. Well, the short political cycles, that's a reality of political life. And John Porcari yesterday in his intervention gave a lot of examples of things that can be done in the short term. There are many simple, small things to do to make the transport system better for people, and that can be done. But I'd like to mention some sort of more strategic and longer term thing. I think there's a very strong case in many areas of transport policy to try and go beyond party political differences and find cross-party agreement in the Parliament to maintain and develop the transport system. This could be, for example, an infrastructure plan including a long-term budget. It could be an agreement on maintenance and rehabilitation of the system, something that we really need. Otherwise, our system risks a catastrophic decline in quality. Road safety is another area where a cross-party political agreement could help the momentum and avoid easy political point scoring. Now, how far such agreements could go is a matter for all of you, and many of you have done things like that. But that's one area, I think, where we could get a longer-term vision about transport if we got more political agreement through our Parliament. Now, what about influencing the demand for transport, the second point I mentioned? Well, I think one step is that it is essential to work in a much more proactive way with those who actually do influence transport demand, like land use planning authorities, business development agencies, even property developers. This is important if we seriously want to influence things like modal split or car use. We cannot do that through exhortation or aspirations, as 30 years of failed experience should tell us clearly. We can also influence, by the way, demand through the wider use of economic instruments, which still have a great potential to become a very effective policy tool. But here, though the economic arguments are fairly clear, the political ones are far from over. Since transport policy concerns everyone, I think the transport policy of the future and the transport ministry of the future will be a much more open, outward-looking ministry with proactive links to other ministries and other policies and other actors, and not a sector or a ministry that just reacts to events, as is too often the case. Too many ministers over my time in office have said to me, I just spend my time going from one crisis to another. Now, what about the third element, the public expectations? Well, this is very important and maybe very close to the theme of our conference. The point is that each individual transport trip is different in time and in space. But so far, it has been impossible for us to organise our transport services to take adequately account of this. But now, I think with the amazing developments in communication technologies, we have new opportunities to make public services and collective transport services much more tailored to the needs of the individual. The volcano last year, and indeed just yesterday, and the recent winter disruptions that many of you had in your countries demonstrated clearly our weaknesses here, but showed, I think, too, some of the ways forward, especially the need for massive improvement in the provision of information to users. Public expectations can also be maybe not satisfied, but eased by having a much more demanding relationship with the public sector companies, the publicly owned companies. And there are still many of them under your influence and your control. We must get them to put their customers first, and they can be required to do much more than they do at present, to publish, to report, and be held accountable on their performance, on their punctuality, service quality, reliability, number of strikes, the costs. So all of that can really help, I think, give a much more accountable transport system. And this more enlightened policy requires a far better dialogue with the public and far better communications to the public. We heard yesterday about Germany and how Germany is trying hard to explain to the public the difficulties of transport policy and the constraints and so on. And that's an example for other countries. It's also a role we're trying to do, to try and bring transport policy more into the public domain so that people can understand things better and become better transport policy experts. So there are three sort of political thoughts perhaps that people might take up during the day. But I would say that in addition to those longer term kinds of measures, there are many ways to make our transport systems better. I put the accent on some of the political ones, but we have heard many yesterday, and I hope they can all contribute to our discussions. Finally, I do hope you get the opportunities you want to dialogue, to meet each other, to think, to share your policies, your successes, but also your failures, because there's a lot to be learned there. And of course, when you have solved all your transport policy problems, remember you also too have many cultural and other opportunities in Leipzig and the Saxony region, and you should enjoy them too. So thank you all very much for your time.
Thank you very much, Jack. It would certainly be a most exceptional Transport Minister who was able to serve 10 years as you've served in your position as Secretary General. It's certainly true that political careers are quite short. In my career, I did at one time become a future Prime Minister. And now I'm actually a former future Prime Minister. My political career actually came to an end in a blaze of publicity on national television when I lost my seat in the British Parliament. This moment was subsequently voted by the British public their third favourite moment of the 20th century. So that is how political careers do sometimes come to an end. Thank you, Jack, for some very wise thoughts based on your very long experience of the transport field, and we'll try and weave those into the discussion today. Well, it's my great pleasure now to invite José Blanco López to the stage. He is the Ministro de Fomento, so that means of public works and of transport in Spain. He has a very long history in Spanish politics, first elected to the Senate in 1989 and to the Spanish Parliament in 1996, been in his present position now for just over 2 years. He took the position in April 2009. And we must also say thank you so much for the way in which you have conducted your presidency, and we must say thank you very much for the lovely party that we enjoyed thanks to you last night. José Blanco López, please.
Quisiera comenzar.
I would like to begin by thanking the mayor of Leipzig and Minister Ramsauer for the hospitality they have shown in welcoming us to this annual summit. I would also like to express my gratitude to all those taking part in this event, and especially the Secretary General of the Forum, Jack Short, whose major work in this event deserves special recognition. It is truly an honor for me to address you here at the International Transport Forum 2011. As a member of the Spanish government, I must say that this is with great pride that my country has assumed the annual presidency of the Forum and has high hopes of contributing to the success of the agenda that brings us together this year in Leipzig, united under the motto Transport for Society. The development of the global economy has made the different sectors of society, citizens, companies, and organizations focus on transport, and our first duty as those responsible for this sector is to respond to this challenge in an appropriate manner. For this reason, I cannot help but be pleased that Transport for Society is the motto presiding over this forum, because it is society that shows us the path we must follow and the paths we must pay more attention to, especially to those of us who have commitments as political figures. Citizens are increasingly conscious of the fact that transport systems play a decisive role in their living interests and well-being, and also that they are essential for economic growth and access to labor, goods, and services markets. Companies and individuals that use the various modes of transport on a daily basis ask that their mobility needs be met by services that are of ever-improving quality, that have less impact on climate change, on people's health and on nature, and that are also guaranteed disabled access. Society demands that urbanization processes be linked to parallel developments of related transport systems in such a way that they do not slow down the growth rate of our economies. Taxpayers demand greater efficiency in public expenditure, and even more so in a context where the global financial crisis makes financial resources scarcer. Steering infrastructure planning towards economic efficiency to increase our economy's competitiveness is an obvious priority at this time. Meeting all the challenges and demands that society puts before us requires us to redouble our efforts to draw a clear and useful roadmap. We know that decisions in the world of transport need time to be planned and undertaken, and that their effects last many years. We are at that key moment in Europe, defining strategic lines with a new white paper on transport looking towards 2050 in order to consolidate a single European transport area. Last year, as part of the Spanish presidency of the European Union, I had the privilege to be a witness and a driving force behind this process, the need for which I fully share. In this regard, the crisis caused by the cloud of volcanic ash, which affected European airspace last year and brought about major changes in air transport with a very significant impact on other modes of transport, highlighted the need to make progress in the international coordination of decisions that affect transport. I believe that what we have learned from past experience can help us, specifically at this time, to minimize the impact of the volcanic ash cloud that threatens us. Please allow me to briefly mention the new focal points we are giving to transport policy in Spain. After almost a decade in which Spain has been a leader in public investment in transport, taking advantage of a favorable economic cycle, we are giving new direction to our policy to meet the new challenges ahead. We are doing so with the perspective that is presiding over this forum, first and foremost, attending to citizens' mobility needs, economic efficiency, and environmental sustainability. To this end, we are going to continue to invest in railways, decisively carrying goods to the train, and completing a high-speed network that directly connects 24 Spanish cities and provides services to more than 22 million travelers each year. And promoting urban mobility by improving the range of train services in urban and metropolitan areas, both in terms of quality and quantity, with 3,665 daily services used by more than 402 million travelers per year. We are emphasizing conservation and improved safety in our road networks in order to consolidate the giant steps we have taken in reducing the number of road accidents and victims. In 2009, 1 year earlier than the period stipulated by the European Commission in which to reduce the number of deaths by half, we achieved a 57.5% reduction compared to 2001, from 4,067 deaths down to 1,730. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum enjoys a well-earned reputation for its leadership in strategic thinking on the transport challenges in our world. The issues chosen for the sessions and roundtable discussions for 2011 are ample proof of this. This range of issues, which the Forum has been working on since its creation and which have given rise to interesting recommendations, summarize the challenges faced by transport systems in relation to society's demands here and now. Fairness, guaranteeing access to transport for those sectors of society who enjoy fewer opportunities due to the level of income, reduced personnel mobility, or location. Road safety, decisively reducing the unacceptable number of victims and accidents that traffic continues to cause in cities and on roads. Protecting travelers against possible illegal activities in transport, while at the same time respecting their rights and optimizing the significant public resources that we invest for this purpose. Improving mobility in urban areas in particular. Society demands new, better interconnected public transport models with more information on the services, as well as a reduction of the negative impact caused by the distribution of goods in urban and metropolitan environments. Caring for the environment and health. Transport has become more energy efficient in recent years, but it continues to have significant challenges to overcome due to its energy dependence and the effect this has on the environment. Citizens are requesting major new steps in this race to achieve the sustainable mobility that is sought throughout the world. The use of more environmentally friendly modes of transport, innovation and intelligent transport systems, reducing the energy intensity of cars and promoting electric cars, or a more efficient design of flight paths. The Single European Sky project is an example of this. Mark the way on a path on which there is no room for turning back. Economic growth, because now more than ever, transport policy has to be geared towards supporting economic growth and improved employment. This is why we must achieve and invest significant resources in the conservation, renovation, and improvement of our transport systems. Efficiency. Society is asking us to do more with less. We must unavoidably come up with a major transport investment with diversified sources of funding. This means giving greater emphasis to public-private partnerships in providing services and infrastructure, optimizing the use of public resources with new tools, stepping up collaboration on an international, regional, and local scale to maximize efforts, and assessing transport efficiency from the user and taxpayer's point of view with better indicators. Lastly, technological innovation and human resources. Many of the above-mentioned challenges can only be met by promoting new technologies and solutions based on innovation, as we already had the opportunity to see at last year's forum. Also, making improvements in the training and qualification of the significant number of employees working in the transport sector. A priority as the quality of our transport infrastructure and services depends on them to a large extent. I'm sure that this year's forum will make a significant contribution to responding to these challenges that society has put before us. The planned activities and the quantity and quality of this year's participants are a guarantee of that. All that remains is to reiterate my country's pleasure at having assumed the presidency and reaffirm the commitment of our utmost dedication to achieving this forum's objectives and consolidating this top-level international meeting point in the world of transport. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, and thank you for expressing some of the challenges that we face in this field. The challenge of accessibility at a time of economic austerity, the challenge of economic growth at a time when we're also extremely concerned about the environment. May I say many congratulations on those remarkable figures that you give for improved road safety in Spain. And as for Spanish railways, an extraordinary story of transformation. We shall be hearing more about Spanish railways later. Well, now it's my great pleasure to welcome the German Federal Minister for Transport, Building and Urban Development, Dr. Peter Ramsauer. He's a member of the CSU party. He's been in his present position for just about 2 years. But first elected to the Bundestag back in 1990, so already a very substantial political career. And this might be the moment for me to say how much we appreciate the support that the federal German government gives to this particular event, which comes to Leipzig again and again. Thanks very much for your welcome and for your support in being able to hold this conference here in Germany. Welcome to the stage.
Sehr geehrter Herr Präsident, lieber José.
Mr. President, José, colleagues, ministers, colleagues from all over the world, dear Jack Short, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy that I can be your host, and as your host minister, that I'm able to welcome you to Leipzig. The German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, has asked me to pass on her best wishes. She hopes that we will have a thrilling and fruitful ITF meeting. It is a particular pleasure for me to welcome my predecessor as Minister for Transport and Construction, Mr. Wolfgang Tiefensee, who was not just my predecessor, but who has succeeded in establishing the ITF meeting here in Leipzig, and who for many years was the Lord Mayor of this wonderful city. Mr. Tiefensee, welcome to you as well. I would like to expressly welcome the present-day Lord Mayor of the city of Leipzig, Mr. Jung. And twice already it has been mentioned how wonderfully the ITF has been established here in Leipzig, and it's a wonderful feeling to be here in Leipzig. I would like to stress that I, as the Federal Minister for Transport, will do my utmost that in the future as well, Leipzig will remain the host of the ITF meeting. As far as the German federal government is concerned, we will do our utmost to make sure that the ITF should stay here in Leipzig, and Mr. Lord Mayor, I take it that the city of Leipzig will do their share as well. Ladies and gentlemen, the federal government sees this forum as the crucial, I would like to stress that again, the key event where basically the international mobility community meets every year and discusses topical questions and developments to do with transport and mobility. There is an exchange of opinions, and an exchange of opinions and cooperation are more important than ever in a globalized world. The eruption of the Icelandic volcano a few days ago shows that very well. And phenomena like that do not just affect aviation and air transport in a few countries, but whole continents are affected by natural phenomena like that. So we have to be prepared for situations like that at an intergovernmental as well as international level, and we have to find uniform procedures for how to deal with volcano eruptions like that and the volcano ash problem. Immediately after last year's eruption in April last year, I stressed that this is very important, and at every opportunity we have taken initiatives and pressed for solutions. as far as I have been able to do that in my country, we have found solutions and have also tried to establish those solutions at a European level. All that has made a lot of progress. However, this process is still going on and will go on for quite some time. The European Union, as well as the International Civil Aviation Organization, should act, and the present eruption of the volcano should lead to a situation where, as fast as possible, uniform solutions and regulations are found. At the same time, safeguarding security is key. We have seen that over the last couple of days in the UK, in Scotland, in Ireland, in Scandinavian countries, lots of airports had to be closed down. Also in Iceland as such. And yesterday in northern Germany, 3 airports had to be closed down for several hours. Hamburg, Bremen and Berlin were affected. And Michael Portillo has just said that as a transport minister, you always have to say sorry. And I would like to apologize that some of you may have had to grapple with some inconveniences. However, security and safety is key. And is the most important thing. Yesterday I got a rather cheeky letter from the General Secretary of IATA, and I didn't understand that, and I will not respond to that letter, as IATA itself as well. It is their job to talk to jet engine makers and to sort out what I have been demanding for more than a year. So clear technical thresholds and limits, that is, which are benchmarks and yardsticks for politicians who have to take decisions. Authorizations like that, and we got the go-ahead from the jet engine makers up to 2 milligrams of ash per cubic meter of air under certain conditions. Then we are still allowed to fly. And if such a green lighting process, if we don't get the green light, if those 2 milligrams are exceeded, then there must be reasons. And of course, it cannot be confirmed that then flying has no risk. Then nobody can ask politicians and authorities that we disregard those threshold levels and still green light flights. Because if something were to happen, you all know and we all know who would have to carry the can and who would be blamed. Hence, I would like to appeal to jet engine makers, aircraft makers, and the airlines to get even more intensively involved in that work. It would be a great success if at this year's annual meeting of ICAO, a lot of progress were to be made, and if fixed threshold levels and limits could be decided upon. Which brings me back to the actual reason for us to be here. I would like to stress again, us in Leipzig and we in Germany, we love being the host to the ITF. We are very happy that some of you have come from far-flung countries and have indeed come to Leipzig. We are very happy about that. This year's topic is a topic which is particularly multifaceted. Transport for society, that is. Both notions are closely connected, and there is a thrilling link between the two. On the one hand, the kinds of mobility of the present mirror the state of society, developments in society, and at the same time kinds of mobility have an impact on further societal and economic development in our countries, but also developments between our countries, relationships between our countries, and how continents develop and how traffic develops in the air, on the sea, and on the roads. We have to succeed in creating links between transport infrastructure and mobility, and to see to it that they can express their full potential. At the same time, if there is a lack of transport ways and means of transport, will lead to a situation that potential for freedom, for wealth and well-being and cultural development will not be fully tapped, and that potential will not be used to the detriment of our societies. So we are well advised to remember the basic importance of our transport ways for freedom, for the expression of freedom, and for wealth and well-being. At the same time, we have to face up to urgent questions and issues, because firstly, there is a ongoing growth in transport. There is a growing demand for new transport paths and ways, and more space is needed for that and is being taken up by that. Secondly, a growth in transport uses up huge amounts of fuels and emit noise and pollutants to the same huge degree. And thirdly, the growing mobility of billions of people sees to it that there are considerable safety questions, security questions, as far as technology is concerned, accidents are concerned, but also as far as aspects of internal, as well as external security is concerned. And terrorism is the watchword here. So politicians have to see to it to achieve a situation where all those aspects are considered and properly accounted for. Advantages, burdens, and risks always have to be kept in balance, and we have to manage that tightrope walk. Not least as, especially in the mobility sector, there are permanently ongoing changes and leaps in development. Responsible transport policies comprises much more than just the building of transport ways, of roads, or the establishment of traffic rules. Transport policies are responsible for quite a range of societal, economic and ecological and relevant fields of action. What is particularly important is that the right balance should be found. I would personally plead for a situation that pragmatic policies should be pursued, involving people, but which also at the same time goes about existing problems in a resolute way, to find the right kind of measure and to communicate those policies to our citizens and to the public at large is becoming a more and more demanding and difficult task. Acceptance of transport and political decisions is becoming a more and more crucial question in Germany in particular. This is true in particular for whether and how large-scale projects should be implemented. Large-scale projects are more and more difficult to overcome acceptance barriers. Right at the top of our political agenda for that reason is the following issue, and this is to do with our slogan, with the motto of this conference, Transport for Society, that is, how we can make sure that the existing ways of involvement of citizens and citizen participation can basically come up to the original task. We have to find new ways in order to find the right balance of all interests and vested interests concerned to come to a large-scale and broad-based consensus for important projects important for our country. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to a lively exchange of experiences as far as those issues are concerned, but also as far as all the other issues are concerned to do with the motto. And we will discuss what is to be done in more concrete terms. We'll discuss that on this second day of our meeting. We will discuss all the very topical and crucial issues which we have to face up to, given the difficult challenges we have to cope with as far as transport is concerned. For instance, emissions trading or cap and trade is something that has to be seen against a global context. Ladies and gentlemen, I look forward to today's sessions, and I look forward to the solutions which will be found, especially as far as the issue is concerned, what needs to be done. You can vent theoretical ideas as much as you like. However, the political elite will be measured against what has been done in concrete terms. So this is going to be a very exciting day. So all the best and welcome again, a warm welcome again on behalf of all Germans. Thank you very much for your attention.
Well, thank you, Minister, and your speech injected a very interesting note of topicality as you began to discuss the problems over the volcanic ash cloud. Your speech was also, I think, a very interesting insight into the responsibilities that politicians feel, and also the relationship between international bodies such as IATA and those who represent the governments of sovereign nations. So I thought all of those were most interesting aspects to your remarks. Now, talking of volcanic ash, and nearly all of our speakers, I think, already have done so, I'm very pleased to introduce to you now somebody who has defied the volcanic ash to arrive here. Our keynote speaker this morning, Professor Jeffrey Sachs, left New York last night, transferred through Frankfurt, arrived at Leipzig at 8:10 this morning, and arrived here looking fresh as a daisy and beautifully turned out and all ready to take the platform and make his speech. So congratulations on defying the elements and being with us today. So Professor Sachs is director of the Earth Institute. He's also Kettler Professor of Sustainable Development and Professor of Health Policy and Management at Columbia University in New York. He's a special advisor to Ban Ki-moon and has a number of other high-level advisory positions. He's the author of a book with a very intriguing and challenging title. The book is called Common Wealth and the End of Poverty. Let's hope so. Professor Jeffrey Sachs.
Thank you, Michael, and ministers, and ladies and gentlemen. Indeed, I am here not to complain, but to say thank you. All the logistics worked wonderfully, and not just from New York, but in the last 3 days, I've been through Abuja, Nigeria, Lagos, Atlanta, New York City, Frankfurt, and Leipzig, and all flawlessly, without a single delay, without a single inconvenience. without a single apparent lack of safety in any way. And I think it actually is a brilliant accomplishment of the modern transport system that it can move 5 billion air passengers per year and absolutely unimaginable amount of freight around the world. And it is the very backbone of our world economy. I think if there is any quest to place the importance of transport in society, we can put it aside in a way, because transport defines economic life. And without transportation, one may live at subsistence in extreme poverty, and as in some of the villages where I work in Africa, to try to find ways to overcome poverty. But certainly one of the first things that one does in such a context is to try to identify the roads and the transport and communications connections that can allow impoverished communities to escape from poverty. If you go back to the very beginning of modern economics, at least from the Anglo-Saxon point of view, and that is Adam Smith's Wealth of Nations, you'll find transport virtually on every page. And Adam Smith very famously said that the discovery of America and that of the passage to the East Indies by way of the Cape of Good Hope are the two greatest and most important events recorded in the history of mankind. Essentially, transport uniting the world, Smith defined as the pivotal event of modern humanity. It was the creation of the global era. And that great book goes on to explain how favorable transport conditions, particularly sea-based transport, make possible the division of labor, make possible the large-scale trade that in essence defines the rise of productivity and the rise of the modern economy. And I think it is fair to say that every fundamental step of globalization since those two great events in the last decade of the 15th century have been events that have been occasioned by breakthroughs in transport. First, it was ocean-going vessels that defined globalization to begin with in the 15th century. It was ocean steamers and the telegraph that defined the advent of the modern world economy in the 19th century. And it certainly is the great container vessels, the digital era, that defines the advent of the intensive globalization in the second half of the 20th century and that carries us through today. Without those advances in transport, and especially what seems in a way a very basic point, but containerization, the rise of Asia, the fundamental shifts in the world economy now to a rebalancing between East and West, a rapid convergence of the developing countries would be unimaginable. Transport has made it possible. Transport is the essence of what makes the world economy interconnected and productive. So what's the problem if all is working so well? The problem, I think, lies in several dimensions, all of scale. We are now 7 billion people, or at least we will be, according to the United Nations, as of October of this year. The world population continues to grow at about 75 to 80 million people per year. We will be 9 billion on the planet by mid-century. And if we don't do a little bit better in reducing fertility rates, we will top 10 billion by the end of this century. There is, without question, a stunning matter of scaling up our infrastructure, including transport infrastructure, to accommodate a world of 7 billion and then 9 billion and perhaps more in a modern world economy. 2 days ago, as I mentioned, I was in Nigeria. Nigeria, like the rest of sub-Saharan Africa, is grappling with the fundamental development of the infrastructure for transport, for power, for water and sanitation, for urban development. There can be no greater challenge, in fact, than to bring the billions of people in the low-income countries into a modern economy in a sustainable manner. And this is perhaps the greatest transport challenge in the world. I was with President Goodluck Jonathan on several occasions in the last 3 days during that visit to Nigeria, and transport infrastructure was under discussion at every single meeting as a fundamental need, because these are countries that don't have the highway systems, the rail systems all in place. They're building them for the first time. And this, I would say to you, ministers, is a challenge for you in partnership with the developing countries as well, of tremendous significance. Second, of course, is the era of mass, unprecedented urbanization. I know we have very distinguished participants from China here. China's undergoing the most rapid urbanization in world history right now. How China accomplishes that will profoundly affect the quality of life in China throughout this century, and will have profound spillovers to the rest of the world as well. One of China's absolutely most important questions is the role of the automobile in China. Right now, roughly speaking, and the numbers change, so I'll be very rough indeed, there are about 100 million light-duty vehicles in China. China's become the world's largest automobile market. As of last year, new sales on the order of about 13 million units per year, overtaking the United States and probably permanently overtaking the United States. If China were to have the automobile density of the U.S., which is nearly one automobile per person, in fact, China would add about 1 billion vehicles over the next decades. That would more than double the number of automobiles on the road in the world. This, I think, would be unattractive for China's development, and it would raise profound questions for global sustainability as well. But it's a fundamental choice, and it involves lots of crucial questions, decision-making, economic incentives, strategies of urbanization, some of the biggest challenges that have ever been taken on. And I think that this is an open part of the question. Third, and obviously closely related, is that a vast part of our transport system is petroleum-based. And we are in the era of peak oil, at least peak conventional oil. I believe it started, other people say 5 or 10 years from now. I believe the rise in oil prices during the past several years to the roughly $110 a barrel Brent price is a sign of a fundamental shift to scarcity in conventional oil supplies. And this poses a massive question as billions of people, China and India, just the two countries alone, accounting for nearly 40% of the world's population, enter the income levels of mass scaling up of transport for both personal and freight. So managing an era of scarcity is a new challenge, because our whole era of modern economic growth since James Watt improved the steam engine in the second half of the 18th century has been a fossil fuel era. And we know that we're reaching fundamental limits. And the fourth point is that not only are the limits the scarcity of conventional fossil fuels, but the scarcity of the environmental load to be able to absorb the use of those fossil fuels. As everybody here knows very well, but it cannot bear repeating. It needs to be repeated on every occasion. We've already breached 390 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. I direct an institute at Columbia University with two of America's leading climate scientists, our leading national government climate scientist, James Hansen, who for very rigorous reasons of a lifetime of research and a large scientific team, argues that 350 parts per million is the threshold beyond which we have serious anthropogenic damage to the global climate system. In other words, we're already in the era of instability and anthropogenic forcings of an extremely dangerous level, and yet much more is to come. So I think all of this says that while the transport infrastructure of the world is in some sense nearly miraculous, and it is, to move safely and efficiently and at relatively low cost billions and billions of people and vast amounts of freight around the world in an unprecedentedly scaled, large and productive world economy, we can't simply go on the way we're going. There need to be fundamental changes in the infrastructure in the 21st century. That is an extraordinarily difficult task. Now, at the same time, there are great opportunities. First, there is the opportunity of a new era of urban planning and urban organization, because billions of people will be entering the urban environment in the coming decades, the fastest urbanization in history. They should not repeat the mistakes, certainly of my own country, the United States, of creating urban and suburban sprawl and an automobile-based society. This would be a disaster for them, just as it's been a headache for the U.S. in recent decades. We need a new sustainable design, mass transit, high density, lots of walking, for a safe, high-quality urban environment. This is a huge opportunity, I believe. Second is the convergence of technologies. Transport and communications are always complementary in a fundamental way, and the digital era and the renewable energies era and new transport technologies, especially around electric vehicles, in the view of my colleagues and myself, give an opportunity for fundamental breakthroughs in new design. It's not just an electric vehicle. It's a much smarter traffic flow design, much lighter and safer urban vehicles, vehicles that are able to tap into renewable energy systems. And one of my treasured colleagues, Larry Burns, who is a professor at University of Michigan and a senior scientist at the Earth Institute and was the senior vice president of General Motors for new product development, will be speaking to you later today about his concepts of the mobility internet, which is an integration of renewable energy, electric vehicles, and advanced information technologies. This is a great opportunity. Third of opportunities is building the new infrastructure backbone where it doesn't exist. Africa is now a continent of 1 billion people. It will be 2 billion people by mid-century. The infrastructure is there to be built for the first time, actually. And so this is an opportunity that needs to be harnessed properly. That's rail, highways, fiber, waterways. Similarly, infrastructure in Central Asia, linking China with Central Asia with Europe. And also better integration of the Middle East, North Africa, and the Mediterranean. All of this has to be accomplished in a context of a transition to a low-carbon economy. Ministers, you have a huge task, but it is an unavoidable task because business as usual has become no longer an option. All of this means a new sustainability framework as a fundamental organizing principle. For the European ministers here, let me emphasize one point, if I might, from what I see internationally. Europe is way ahead of the curve in thinking about the policy framework and governance. And this is not to make invidious comparisons with the many ministers coming from outside of Europe. But Europe is the only region that in a fully politically integrated and technically integrated manner has taken a regional view of these issues. and has taken a view that puts together the sustainability, the carbon, the climate, and the quality of life dimensions. And I think Europe's experience, from my own point of view, is exemplary in this way, but needs to be shared broadly. And I would urge that you do so, both in designing technology pathways for sustainability, public-private partnerships, new financing models, proper costing of externalities, all of the policy dimensions for sustainable transport. Finally is the question of the political and the governance institutions to make this possible. I think it's obvious to everybody here and to all the pressures that you as transport ministers face. You don't do this alone. In fact, there are so many forces impinging that it's hard to figure out how one does it at all. Because transport goes together with public health, goes together with energy systems, goes together with land use, needs research and development, needs public acceptability. It is a tremendously complex challenge because transport's not a technology, not a device. It is a system, and is a system that has spatial characteristics and social characteristics that inherently make it very complex. In one sense, the transport sector understands this and has been engaging with the public sector, private sector, and civil society for centuries. And so this sector has a certain suppleness of working across many stakeholders in society. But the challenges are getting more and more complicated. We need university, industry, civil society, government networking in an extremely intensive manner. We need new models of public-private financing. Simple models are not sufficient. Simply cap and trade, for example, is a very insufficient tool to handle the carbon transition. The financing issues are much more complex than simply a cap and trade system, for example. We do not have clearly a global governance structure either in this area. And I do want to say that we need one, and perhaps this forum can be one. It is, as I heard, called the Global Unique Forum, but I would like to see many more African ministers here, and I would like to see ministers from other developing countries so that we really have a global forum that can also address the integration of the world economy and the challenges in particular of the poorest countries as well. Finally, all of this is very hard, I don't have to tell you, but it's hard not only because it's complex, but because of the vested interests that are engaged as well. My hat is off to Europe for its advances and showing the way, because I do think that Europe is ahead of the curve of the rest of us. I'm coming from a country where the vested interests of oil and the coal sector and the traditional means have been so powerful that we've not been able to move on almost any of these issues for a quarter century. We are in the lock grip of the 20th century technologies at a time when we need to move decisively to 21st century solutions. I hope, ministers, that you will help to make that happen. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Jeffrey, very much indeed. They're just going to be putting on the chairs now for the panel discussion, which will begin in just a second. Jeffrey, any speech that begins with a reference to Adam Smith is a good speech as far as I'm concerned, but it went on very well after that. Could I put one question to you? I mean, in your country and in my country and in Europe, the automobile is seen as the sign of aspirations that have been achieved, and it's really seen also as a symbol of liberty. It's what people want, and it's the way by which they demonstrate their freedom. How do we acquire the moral authority in the United States, in Europe, to say to India or to say to China, your aspiration should not be to have one automobile per head of population, as we have?
great question, and I'm going to speak from my moral high horse, if I might, because 9 years ago I moved from a suburb of Boston as a professor at Harvard University to New York City as a professor at Columbia University. And we gave up all our cars in the household, both the two that my wife and I had and our children who had cars also to get to college at the time. Nothing was more liberating, I might say, than to have no cars. So I have to, with all apologies to any automobile companies in the room, living in a densely populated city, very high density of Manhattan, it's a very special place. But having no car, no insurance, no parking problems is an absolutely wonderful and liberating experience for the last 9 years. We do not need cities with personal automobiles for everybody the way that America did it. And America designed itself after 1940 basically along the notion that people would live out in the suburbs, drive to work, live in the automobile, and it turns out to be a very expensive habit and creates a lot of problems of bad health and bad environment and high cost. Part of the problem, I wouldn't say it's the only reason, but because Americans are driving all the time, we have the greatest obesity epidemic in the world in the United States. 1/3 of all adults are obese. In New York City, the rates are much, much lower because people walk. And a walking city is a great city as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you very much indeed. Now, I must say your own figure is, of course, a great advertisement for walking. Now, Jeffrey Sachs is very kindly going to join us on the panel. I have to apologise for the fact that Philip Hammond from the United Kingdom is not able to join us today. So, Jeffrey, would you like to take your seat here on the panel? I'm going to invite the panellists for this session now to come to the stage. I'll read their names out straight away. Please come straight to the stage. I'll say some words of introduction to you when I ask each of you to speak. So, first of all, we're delighted to have Vice Minister of Transport from the People's Republic of China, Gao Hongfeng. Could he come to the stage, please? Thank you very much, Vice Minister. Also, Alain Flausch, Rainer Oehler, Teofilo Serrano Beltran, and Hela Soholt, please. Thank you very much. A round of applause for our panellists, please. Welcome. Hello. So, we are running a little late, and that is mainly because we began a little late. So I'll let this session run slightly into the coffee break, and then we'll shorten the second session as well and try and make up the time that way. But I would ask you panelists if you could keep your remarks to 4 minutes. That would be really fantastic. So, on my left, as I've said, Vice Minister for Transport in the People's Republic of China is Gao Hongfeng. He's held that position since March 2008. In view of the discussions that we've had this morning about volcanic ash and so on, the audience here might be particularly interested to know that he was Vice Minister of the General Administration of Civil Aviation of China from the year 2000, I think, until 2008. So he has a very special background in the subject of civil aviation. Minister, you're most welcome, and we look forward to your remarks, please.
Hello,
everybody. And we work closely together. There is a very good cooperation in this forum. It is a very good mechanism to foster cooperation between our 50 member countries It is for that reason that China is very much in favor of this forum. Also, officially, we would like to take a part in it, and we would like to do it even more officially. We are a huge country as far as transport and traffic is concerned, and we have built a lot of new roads and motorways. Domestically, we have established new airlines, 300 million passengers per year in aviation. So as far as transport and traffic is concerned, it's a huge country, and every year those figures grow even further. However, that leads to a lot of problems. For instance, as Mr. Sachs has just said, we have 1.3 billion people. So if everybody were to have a private car, that would be a disaster. For that reason, we switch over to as much public transport as possible. But still, there is a lot of pressure. People would like to buy their own cars, would like to have their own cars. The big cities like Beijing and Shanghai are terribly congested all the time. And of course, this is a bit of a headache for us. But what do we do? In Beijing, for example, what do we do in order to improve public transport? 15 million people rely on public transport in Beijing. So we have to make sure that there are a sufficient number of taxis in Beijing's roads in order to solve that problem. In China, we have already built 1,000 kilometers of underground systems in 20 different cities. There are more and more bus lines in Chinese cities as well. 700 million people use buses annually. So, and quite soon that will be 1 billion people using buses. So this is the case in cities already, but in small villages and in villages there are more and more motorways connecting rural areas and villages. Despite all those infrastructure efforts, we still have a feeling that there is a lot of pressure. We can hardly keep up with the demand. Over the next 5 to 10 years, that will be a big problem we have to face up to. We have to do a lot of catching up as far as infrastructure is concerned. And we have to see public transport as a priority in cities, not to leave cities to their own devices, to let them grow in a helter-skelter way, but to see to it that they grow in an orderly way, in a green way as well. Here, Europe is an example for us. There are valuable pieces of experience, things we can learn from Europe. We've had our own experience as well in our own development process. And those experiences and lessons we would like to share with you. However, there is the following problem, which Professor Sachs has just mentioned. We cannot just adopt the old American and European model. We cannot just mechanically repeat it by expand in a helter-skelter way. However, people are sometimes a bit inert, and developments which are difficult to turned down. People walked at first, then they rode horses, then they got used to riding bikes. China used to be a country of bikers. This seemed to be a very good model. However, now people have taken to the car and people becoming automobilists, so to speak. And this is now ingrained in our minds and firmly printed on our minds. If we now say we have to return to bikes, this is very difficult to achieve. And it's very difficult to change our people's mindsets. Of course, we can say we have to introduce an environmentally friendly mode, an energy-saving mode. Of course, those are very important arguments. Otherwise, our cities will choke and will not be able to cope with the pressure. But here in Leipzig, I would like to communicate with you. I would like to talk to you how we can do it in Europe. As I can see with my own eyes how well European cities work. And I've had the opportunity to have a look around Leipzig. So I will talk to my specialists and experts what I have seen here in Leipzig. Thank you very much for your attention.
Vice Minister, thank you very much indeed. I think we'll have found those remarks fascinating. I was very struck by what you said right at the beginning, that it would be a disaster, in your opinion, if in China you moved to a position where you had one automobile per head of population, and I was most interested to hear about the ways in which you're tackling that, and we'll discuss that more. I said earlier that we were going to hear more about Spanish railways. That is because we're very pleased now to have, as part of our panel, Mr. Serrano Beltran. He is chairman of Renfe Operadora and has held that position since 2009. Before that, he was in urban transport in Sevilla, and I knew him quite a number of years ago now, when he was spending some time at the embassy in London. He's also had his experience of Spanish politics, being elected as a senator in the regional government of Madrid for the Socialist Party. Teófilo, welcome. Your 4 minutes, please.
Muchas gracias, señor Portillo. Estoy particularmente...
At the moment, there is no sound for the English translators.
No sin problemas, no sin dificultades, no sin cuestiones que solucionar.
I could do this with solutions. The history of Spanish rail is a history of success. I can say this because I'm not responsible for this success. So I'm not talking about myself here. I'm talking about people who 20 years ago started a true revolution of the Spanish railway system. The Spanish railway system was, as was the case in many other countries, almost non-existent. It was almost dead. And all of a sudden, all the issues concerning the environment, the issues concerning traffic jams in cities based on the excessive use of cars led to the revolution of the railway system. In Spain, we started heavily developing the rail systems in order to make it usable for commuters, and a few years later, we saw the first success. People left their cars at home and instead decided to go to work on our trains, and that was based on a high-quality infrastructure and high-quality trains and a high frequency of trains and very exact timetables with trains being on time. Next, we found ourselves in a situation where we had to tackle environmental questions, and we decided to do it using a system called high velocity. This is nothing that we invented in Spain. Other countries did it, but now for some time we have been establishing this system in specific regions. For example, there is a high-speed rail going from Madrid to Seville. It wasn't easy to establish this route, this line, for obvious reasons, but this train now is in place and it is now transporting more passengers than cars and planes taken together. So, one passenger that chooses to use a high-velocity train in Spain emits approximately the weight of their suitcase of CO2 into the atmosphere. And we have a relation 1 to 5 compared to cars. So the high-speed trains in Spain have not only helped to improve the travel speed, but they also help to fight against climate change. The success of the high-speed train from Madrid to Seville has turned into a common ground nationwide, and this helped us develop a network of high-speed trains in Spain. There were adverse interests. Of course, there is the automotive industry or the aviation sector. There are certain political movements that were opposed to high-velocity trains. So, well, this is the situation in Spain, but in Spain we now have an agreement. We are sticking to this agreement. We're developing this high-velocity train network. We are increasing the number of passengers using it. So the development of the rail system helps us to face the major challenges. Of course, it is not the only thing that we can do, and there are problems. There are problems of funding the rail infrastructures because rail infrastructure is expensive. They need a lot of time for their design and their construction. Of course, then there are always local and national and structural problems, plus the funding problem on top of that. Currently, we're in the midst of an economic crisis, and all these problems increase. So it's not only about funding infrastructure. There's another problem. In the rail system, there are funding problems when it comes to the costs for operating the system in urban and suburban areas. In almost all the places in the world, these costs are covered by tax earnings. This is not true for high-velocity trains. There was and still is an ongoing debate about this. Now, we're quite experienced with that. We know that the operational costs have to be covered, but also the marginal costs for infrastructure, including the earnings resulting from passenger tickets. So this is how high-velocity trains can be reasonably financed. And this is why I think that the development of the rail system is something that could be of great help when it comes to the technological transformation that we probably face, that will come at the end of the 21st century at the latest, and that will solve some of the problems that we have mentioned. But the railway system currently is a key element for achieving this transformation towards a sustainable development. Thank you very much.
Many thanks, Teófilo. I've been travelling on Spanish railways since the 1950s, and you're absolutely right, there has been a remarkable improvement. Thank you for telling us about that. Now, could you pass the microphone to Alain Flausch, please? Alain is the Chief Executive Officer of STIB, which is the Brussels Public Transport Company, and he's also President of the International Association of Public Transport, UITP, and by background he is an attorney. Alain.
Thank you. I guess you will understand that if I'm here is to make the case of public transport. Now, some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, you may remember when the financial crisis came, when the economic crisis came, we at the association, representing about 3,000 members, most of them operators of public transport system or authorities, we said that was the right time to boost public transport because it was an opportunity to make our case and show that we could provide some solution. But we wished in those days to make it as scientifically as possible. So we start with the idea, why don't we just simulate what would happen if we do nothing in the forthcoming 15 years? And so we simulate what would happen in the world if we didn't move anything, these kind of a scenario of business as usual. Now, the idea was that, as you know, we'll know growth of the population, economic development will continue, and then the volume of mobility will increase by 50%. 50%. The energy consumption, the greenhouse gas emission, and the fatalities would increase by 30%. Obviously, the private car market share would increase, and the public transport share would decrease, as well as the market share of these soft modes. So, how would look our cities if we would go that scenario? Everybody knows, and we have heard that this morning, our city would be congested, pollution would be terrible, life would be very difficult. So the idea is that maybe, and we are convinced that it will, public transport can provide a solution. And that's how we came to designing altogether a strategy which aims at doubling the market share of public transport by 2025. And working together with International Energy Agency, we kind of made a model and say what would happen if we would double the market share of public transport in the forthcoming 15 years. First of all, between the various modes, it would be much more balanced. Car will be not growing any longer. It would still have a market share of about 30% or 35%. Public transport would have doubled, going from, it's a worldwide, of course, analysis, would double from 16% to 32%, and obviously other modes would make the balance. What would be the gain of this scenario? And it's very easily to simulate. Now, later on, we'll come up on the cost of all this, but on the energy consumption, it would be a massive saving of oil that was being calculated for 170 billion tons of oil equivalent every year. For the greenhouse gas emission, it will hardly grow compared to 2005, so it would contribute to the climate issue. On the fatality part, the car accident, will be minus 15%, which, if you transform that into real stuff, is about a city of under 80,000 persons destroyed every year. The health benefit would be much better, and I concur with our professor from New York that walking and biking is excellent for the 10,000 steps every day that you have to make if you want to keep in good shape. Jobs would be increasing. In public transport, would go from 7 million jobs to 14 million jobs. And you know how the car industry is good at telling us that we need the job in the car manufacturing. We are also providing a lot of green and non-movable jobs in our cities. Social inclusion would also make a big step forward because, as you know, we would provide transportation to lots of people who do not have a car and don't need to have a car if we listen to what the scenario would be in China or other parts of that world. Economic growth would, of course, continue because, remember, when the workers of the London transport goes on strike, one day the whole city collapses, and if it goes on. So you see how important public transport is in the development of the economy. So I think our case is this way. Now, who can help? Obviously, we have to do our own work, when I say we, the public transport community, because there's still a lot to do in terms of business culture. There's still a lot to do with making sure that the service that we're providing to the population is matching the lifestyle expectancy of that population. But also government can do a lot. Now, of course, local government can do a lot. Think in terms of just the fare policy. Today, public transport is much too low in this type. If we want to finance the future of public transport, fares must grow. Intelligently, of course, but they must grow. But on a national level, and we are more on the national level, obviously government have plenty of tools they can use to channel the funds where they have to go. That means investing in public transport instead of continuing to pay high social security costs for fatalities and things of that sort. There's a lot of framework that national government can put in place. And for instance, in France recently, they did it by allowing local authority either to go into a congestion charge system or allowing them to come up with other device which helps financing public transport. So what we think, we have a good case, we can provide part of the solution, of course only part of the solution, and I will conclude with this. The savings that we'll be making by adopting that scenario, which are much, much higher than the cost it will take to implement this scenario. And that's the important thing, I guess, for local and national government today, confronted with the financing issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Alain, who is reminding us that we should take 10,000 steps a day. You might be interested to know that you can get an application for your iPhone that counts the number of steps that you take each day. So there's no excuse for any of us falling short of that target. Now, I've been very ungallant in making our lady panelists wait until now, but I have great pleasure in welcoming Helle Soholt. She's from Denmark. She's the founding partner and managing director of Gale Architects. She also teaches urban design theory and studio work. Amongst her academic qualifications, she took a master's at the University of Washington in Seattle in the United States. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Well, first of all, I would like to congratulate IETF on the invitation on urban design issues into this discussion. But I think it is extremely important that we start thinking about how we design the cities, because we cannot solve the problems of transport by only focusing on the systems, but really having this people view that we are discussing these days is really the way forward. The goal of cities, I would say, is never the mobility alone and never the system alone. We really need to find ways of designing cities for people. And that means accessibility, not just in physical terms, but accessibility for all, as we have talked about, equity. And that goes back to the very role of public space, being a frame for people, allowing us to be in cities, allowing us to be together and to meet each other in public spaces. Having said that, when we look at how we design cities today, we often start with the system and the traffic anyhow. We start with focusing on the buildings and making prognosis on how much traffic those new buildings are going to generate and so forth. And the last thing we actually do focus on is the people. How are we going to invite all to participate in our cities of the future? So I do think we need to think about how we bring together land use issues and transport issues, but not in a traditional sense where we focus on TODs, but land use, transport, and social behavior, social needs, and quality of life. In only that way we can achieve PODs, people-oriented development. I think it is extremely important when we talk about people-oriented development that we take into account the non-motorized mobility. How do we actually invite people to walk and cycle more, to make them healthy, to make them feel accessible to each other in the public spaces? And to allow people to walk and cycle more, we actually need to think proximity and not just density in terms of numbers. We need to think fine grain and instead of fast flow and big scale. And we need to think about the human scale in our regional planning. Public transport, I would argue, is never better than the pedestrian and bike systems that are supporting it. People need to get to the public transport. And therefore, we need to focus on social innovation. We need to focus on how to build sustainable urban cultures, not systems alone. Think convenience, think experience at eye level. How do we bring planning to an eye level? I think cities should be friendly. I think they should be human scale. I think they need to be slow as well as fast. They should be as diverse as we are as people. And in order to achieve that, we need to actually study people behavior. We need to visualize people in planning. We need new measures. How do we measure perceived safety? How do we measure urban quality? What is urban quality for people? And how do we measure life quality? Today's theme, meeting people's needs, is really what we need to start focus on. And lastly, I would say, I think it is possible for us to carefully take care of cars in cities for people. I think we can, by the examples of Copenhagen and other cities, carefully take care of cars, freight, transport in cities for people. But I would argue that the other way around is not possible. We cannot make sure that people will come if we design cities for cars. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm most grateful to panelists for keeping their remarks so short, and that was really fascinating. I'm going to ask you some questions about it later, though. Now, Rainer Oehler is our next speaker. He is the Senior Vice President, Government Relations, Communications and External Affairs at Airbus. He's been in that position since 2006. Probably about half of us here arrived on an Airbus one way or another on our journey to get here. Long career as a civil servant working in the Bundestag, and also, strange enough, working in the British Parliament at one stage, and then made his way up through DASA and EADS to his present position. Rainer.
Michael, thank you very much for your introduction and the friendly welcome. And I think before I go down to the business and talk about the increase of transport modes, the benefits, the increase of the benefits for all of the transport modes, I think I would like to remind us all of one fact. Aviation is a very, very young transport mode. We are the first generation sitting here for whom aviation has become a, I would say, daily or weekly at least, option for both in private and in business life. And I think that is important when we discuss this transport mode. And I would like to finish this introduction by saying I still believe that flying is a wonderful thing.
Yeah.
And the second thing I'd like to say is I would like to come back to what Professor Sachs said earlier. Indeed, we have billions of people flying in the meantime. It's 2.5 billion people. Those are the users of aviation as a transport mode. But it's also 33 million people working in aviation, including the tourists, the tourist industry. I think that's also a fact that we shouldn't neglect. And the economic importance of aviation can only be underlined with another number. And this number is that 25% of all our economic transactions today depend on the movement of goods and people by air. And the number of users that we are going to see, ladies and gentlemen, is going to increase dramatically. Over the last 40 years, we as an aircraft manufacturer, together with our airline customers, we have maybe addressed 1 billion people living in the West, in America, in Western Europe, in Australia, in Japan. Now the developing countries are coming, and we are seeing another market of maybe 5 to 6 billion people. So that, in fact, means that 80% of our potential market is still in the development phase. That means that we can expect, I think, a massive growth of aviation in the future. In fact, we believe that in 20 years, we are going to see 6 billion passengers, and we're going to see more than 50 million people working in the aviation industry. So what do all these passengers expect from us in the future? And I think that was the question that you raised, Michael. Well, we made a survey among 10,000 young people, the passengers of the future. And they came up with very clear answers. They want to fly more. They want to fly greener. They want to fly faster. They want to fly in more comfort. And of course, they want to use all their digital tools and toys at all times. And it's interesting that the word safety never once came up Safety is taken for granted in aviation, and I think that is a major achievement as such. And I would say that as we see these growing numbers of passengers and aircraft flying, we need to reconsider safety. Safety can only be enhanced and be in line with the growth expected if we implement modern state-of-the-art air traffic management. So the key challenge is what these young people want from us: flying more and flying greener. So what to do about flying more? Well, flying more means airlines need to buy more eco-efficient, modern, bigger aircraft. That's good news for us. At the same time, it means for us that we have to think today about the planes that we are going to build in 20, 30, 40 years. And we need to start developing the technologies today. And here is where governments are going to play a role also in the future. Governments will have to be on our side as we develop technologies, state-of-the-art technologies, to meet the future challenges of aviation, both the economic challenges and the environmental challenges. And it's a myth that there is an aircraft flying around the globe that has not been supported by government subsidies. It doesn't exist. There is no progress, let's be honest, among ourselves here in the transportation industry. There is no aircraft program in the world that hasn't enjoyed strong government support. The aircraft with which you all came probably from areas here in Europe, and I hope it was this aircraft, it was the A320 family aircraft from Airbus. The wings were designed in the late 60s in the UK, and this technology still is super duper technology, state of the art. But of course it shows how long our technologies last, how long the payback times are. And the British government in particular is enjoying the payback that they are receiving for the investment made at the time. We need governments on our sidelines for meeting the future challenges. And the last word. What is about greener aviation? Ladies and gentlemen, over the last 40 years, aviation has reduced fuel consumption, CO2 and noise by impressive 70%. And listen, I have another figure. Over the last 10 years, demand for fuel, for kerosene, was basically flat, despite an increase of 40% of the traffic. Now, how is that possible? Now, that's more eco-efficient aircraft being introduced, replacing old-time aircraft built in the 60s. Of course, it's also more efficient airline operations, putting more people on board of aircraft, coming to load factors that were, 10 years ago, absolutely unenvisaged. And currently, we have lots of airlines who come to 80% of load factor, which is really outstanding. You have all seen that our industry has given itself, I would say, extremely ambitious climate change targets for the next decades. Every year we want to reduce by our CO2 by 1.5% until 2020. From 2020 we want to be carbon neutral. In 2050 we want to be emitting only half of what we are emitted in 2005 on CO2. Very ambitious. What it requires, of course, new technologies. What it requires is the single European sky really coming now, really making progress, really being established. We've seen too many discussions about the single European sky, about CESAR programs, and so forth. And still, Lufthansa is wasting every day 1 million liter of kerosene in holding patterns and other inefficient flight operations, which could be avoided were there only a single European sky and the new technologies being introduced. What we also need is biofuels, ladies and gentlemen. I'd like to say a provocative sentence. Biofuels should be reserved for aviation because we have no alternatives. Every liter of biofuel that goes into cars is a liter wasted. It shouldn't be in cars. Cars have alternatives. Aircraft have no alternatives. There is only biofuels that can help us, bringing our freight and our passengers to where they need to go. And we need an emissions trading system, ladies and gentlemen, that is neutral to competition and not a not the system that is currently being established in Europe, and which both American airlines and Chinese airlines and other airlines are extremely hostile, threatening countermeasures, retaliation, lawsuits, and what have you. I think that's an increasing burden for our industry. I think we Europeans need to rethink our position, whether a unilateral move is the right thing. I think we need to move forward and go for a global solution, for a global challenge. And ladies and gentlemen, there are many other things that we need to improve. I can't go through that list, and Michael will forbid it. But what I want to say is that it's continuous investment that we need. It's continuous innovation that we need. And it's air traffic management. And if we succeed with these things, then flying can be and remain a wonderful thing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Rainer. I must confess that I have a very large carbon footprint, but I'm feeling not too bad today because I'm sitting next to Jeffrey Sachs, who I think probably has an even bigger one, but then he doesn't drive, so that's good. Now, ladies and gentlemen, we're cutting into your coffee time a little bit to have some discussion. Could I see some hands for people who would like to make an intervention? We have a lady there. We have one microphone there. Could you keep your hand up, please, so that the microphone carrier can see you? And could we have a second microphone to the gentleman in white in the middle there, please? You have the floor.
Thanks. Ariane Dupont from INSTAR, the French Research Institute for Transportation. The key word this morning was cooperation and collaboration, not only between research and academics and private stakeholders, but I would like to underline the need of cooperation between local, national, international level. Let's give me an example in 2 sentences. Our institute convey studies for Lille region, and from 1984 to 2006. And we showed that due to very active policies from the political collaboration with public transportation, technological improvement, the city reduced the GHG emission over the period for the internal trips, for the people living in Lille region. But the GHG emission and local air pollutant increased by 30% due to exchange and transit trips for passenger and freight. And the city doesn't know how to deal with this kind of trips because we need cooperation with the other region, border region, Belgium. So I would like to insist on your key words of this morning about local, national and international. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Does the gentleman there have a microphone yet? Yes, good. Please give us your comment.
Yes, Thorson from the International Federation of Pedestrians. It has been very interesting to listen to you, but I think that you had laid out this morning about a third of the mobility. That is the walking mobility. Helle has talked a little of how to come to the public transport. That's another third. So I would ask you, when you prepare the next decade, to think about how do we come to the transport, also to the car and also to the airplane. Much of it walking. Design for that, please.
Thank you very much indeed. Could I see other hands so that we can be ready for the microphone? There's one at the back there. I'd like a microphone to go to that gentleman. Now, Helle, it occurred to me you were talking about the need to cycle and the need to walk to public transport nodes. But then I was thinking about all these elderly people that we're going to have in society. How do the elderly get to these public transport modes if your solution for the population in general is walking and cycling?
Well, we did talk a little bit about that in yesterday's session. I do think that you can walk to a quite old stage. I think you need to get out of your car much sooner than you actually stop walking. So we basically need to design our cities so that functions and destinations are within proximity of your daily needs and where you live. We need to design complete streets so that children, elderly people, disabled people can actually easily get around. And that goes down to the question of scales. We need to actually design our cities all the way down to human scale as well, also in the actual street design.
I want to ask the Vice Minister a question, if I may. we heard about many of the things that you were doing to do with public transport systems and so on. Are you actually trying to restrain urbanization? Are you trying to put a limit as to how your cities are growing?
Urbanization is necessary. It is a tendency which you shouldn't suppress and cannot suppress. But the question is how to manage that urbanization process and how to design cities well and how to design public transport in cities well. People are pluralistic, so public transport has to be pluralistic to the same degree. The gentleman who has worked for Airbus has said how important planes are, how important aircraft are. Of course, they think that aircraft are the bee's knees and the most important means of transport. The same for car people. They think cars are the most important means of transport. But people are pluralistic. Those who are train buffs, of course, they will use trains. Those who are airplane fans will want to foster airplanes. We have to stand on many legs. We have to make sure that everything should be done in a clean way and should work well. So it has to be clean. The choice has to be taken using cleanliness and as a main factor.
Could I also congratulate the English translation? That was absolutely wonderful. Yes. Alain, I wondered, I don't know what you wanted to say, but I wondered if you might address yourself a little bit to this question of coordination between the different levels of government, because crucial to your speech, you said all of this stuff can be paid for because the external benefits are big enough to pay for what we need to do. But the issue is how you measure those external benefits and then how you coordinate all the different bits of government that have to recognize those external benefits and are willing to give up a bit of their budget in order that the public transport systems can be developed. And those are real political issues. So in 30 seconds, could you take those points, please?
It's a huge political problem, coordination. That's the most important problem in all politics in Europe, at least, if I can speak about Europe. So if there is the will, obviously, and some sort of will to whatever your political party to try to work for the future, then collaboration will come. There is a lot of collaboration today. This is an example today that people are meeting each other to try to collaborate. But we, from the industry of public transport, we have a problem with this. But I tell you, we can also offer a solution. I want to rebound on what the gentleman was saying about walking. First of all, we have to combine public transport, walking, and biking. And it is obvious today, but it was not. In the past, everybody would look at his own feet and not coordinate all this. And we have literature in research that shows that people would use much more public transport when they have solid and reliable public transport on corridors who are efficient. And they are prepared, if they have this sort of option, to walk more, just because they know that instead of having a bus every 30 minutes, they will have a tramway or metro every 5 minutes, reliable. So the combination with walking or biking is okay. And third, smart public transport companies have been doing that move for quite a while now. My company, if I can be modest, is we have a partnership with a car-sharing company. We have a partnership with a free biking system, so that we can really provide door-to-door solution under the helm of public transport, reinforcing public transport with preferred rate card and things of that sort, that makes really an option, an alternative to private car mobility.
Very good. I haven't forgotten you'll do a coffee break. We're going to the coffee break in just a moment. Jeffrey, what would you like to say?
Thank you very much. What a rich discussion and showing all of the different facets of this. I wanted to make one suggestion for ITF. There's a new, absolutely wonderful director of UN Habitat, which is the United Nations organization responsible for urbanization, especially in the developing world. And that is Jean Clos, the former mayor of Barcelona. One of the most successful mayors of modern times, because he helped to design and modernize one of the most beautiful cities in the world, and one where walking and public transport and cultural values are all magnificently on display, making it a very happy city as well. So I thought that there's a wonderful connection between ITF and UN Habitat that might be explored, because when I spoke with Jean Clos just a couple of weeks ago, he told me that his new intention for UN Habitat, which in previous years spent a lot of time on affordable housing, was to move much more towards urban planning and trying to foster a new generation of sustainable urban planning. And that would also be urban design, especially in poor countries. And he made the point that, strangely enough, as a profession, urban planning almost doesn't exist in many parts of the developing world and really needs to be fostered. I think everything that we heard today is that transport can't just be laid down in a city, but the city has to be designed in a very organic way together with the transport and other facilities to make it work. Mr. Close said one thing. He said, the secret of the city is the street. Get the street right, mixed use, walking, shops, commerce, meeting, and then you'll have a city that works. And I think that there's such a wonderful natural connection between transport and urban planning right now that I hope ITF and UN Habitat could get together and do some wonderful things.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen, ministers, it's with great regret that I call this discussion to an end. It's a shame that we began a little bit late. I think we've had a most interesting discussion. I must say it's a nostalgic visit for me. I remember being in this sort of meeting years ago. The thing about this sort of meeting is there's terrific enthusiasm amongst ministers of transport and transport experts about coordinated policy and so on. But when ministers then go back to their cabinet colleagues in their host countries, that enthusiasm isn't always shared by the other ministers who have more pressing problems. And more broadly than that, I would say that one of the features of democracy is that it tends to favour the short term over the long term for obvious reasons. Indeed, I'm not sure that democracy isn't in a state of crisis for precisely that reason. Part of what's going on in Europe today is the result of favouring the short term over the long term, ignoring long-term consequences. So maybe we can take up all of those themes more broadly in our next discussion. For the moment, I want to thank all of you panellists for your most distinguished contributions. Thank you very much. I thank the audience for participating so readily. I want to ask you, if you would, to return before 11:40. Let's get back before 11:40, and that would give us exactly an hour for the next panel. Thank you so much. See you shortly.